Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. The CDC are a bunch of hypocrites, and the people who keep falling for their advisories are fools. That's my intro. And that's what we're going to keep talking about today. Because they keep moving the goalposts, and they'll never stop. They'll never stop until you stop them. The CDC yesterday came out and said kids at summer camp need to wear masks outside. The line is when possible, sports and athletic activities should be done outdoors wearing a mask. And they said kids need to remain 6 feet apart at all times. And they said kids, like I hate looking at these pictures of kids masked. We did a whole segment on this yesterday. I find that to be monstrous to force kids to wear masks like that. That is horrific. That breaks my heart. Absolutely breaks my heart. And the CDC says kids should be quarantined for 2 weeks before they go to the camp. This is insane. I read it this morning and I had to check to make sure that this guidance was from April 2021 and not April 2020. The CDC's lost their minds. And in this segment, I'm going to tell you why. This is the true story. Let's start here. Do you remember this clip here? This is the CDC director, March 29th, 2021. So this is 1 day short of a month ago. Here it is.
I'm going to pause here. I'm going to lose the script, and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now, I'm scared.
It's the CDC director. All right. Also worth noting, she says, I'm going to go off script now as she continues to look at her script. I have impending doom about the future. I'm just going off script here, people. I'm very scared for right, so that was definitely on script. But listen, lady, I don't need your feels about the impending doom. That's a woman of science talking about her feelings. Now, that was 4 weeks ago. On that day, there were 71,000 new cases nationwide, 71,000. Today, or yesterday, 33,000. Okay, that's the impending doom that she was so scared of. The holding back tears, she's talking about the impending doom. Can you keep listening to these people? There's something really interesting that the left is doing when it comes to vaccines. By the way, I should say you're going to listen to those people when it comes to sending your kids to summer camp. Don't send your kids to a summer camp where they have to wear a mask outside and stay 6 feet apart. Don't do it. So the vaccine, something really weird is happening with the left when it comes to vaccines that I want to talk about here. On the one hand, they demand that you get one. They demand that you get a vaccine. They're begging for you to get that vaccine. They're very worried. People on the left are very worried about the vaccine reluctant, as they call them, who are really the only ones who haven't gotten it yet, right? So California has allowed everyone over the age of 16 to get a vaccine for about 10 or 11 days now. So really the only people who haven't gotten a vaccine are the ones who aren't going to get one, right? And the left hates that. So at first, they're going to encourage conservatives, the vaccine reluctant. First, they politely encourage people to get one. Then they're going to nudge people to get them. Then they're going to threaten people to get the vaccine. Oh, if you don't get one, then you can't go here, then you can't go there, you can't do that. Then they're going to shame people who don't get a vaccine. And then they'll force you to get a vaccine. They'll encourage, nudge, threaten, shame, and then force. So on the one hand, all these progressives, health experts, whatever, CDC, they're telling you that vaccines are essential. And how could you be such a terrible person who hasn't gotten one yet? On the other hand, they're saying the vaccine hasn't helped anything, hasn't improved anything, hasn't helped anything, and it's really not necessary to get it. This is the former head of the CDC, up until like a couple of months ago. Former head of the CDC. Here.
I might even go so far as to say that this face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID than when I take a COVID vaccine, because the immunogenicity may be 70%. And if I don't get an immune response, the vaccine's not going to protect me. This face mask will.
Okay. So why get a vaccine? face masks are good enough. So why are you so frantic about me getting a vaccine when you say the masks are maybe even better? This former member of the Council of Foreign Relations, she's a recipient of the Pulitzer Prize. Her name's Lori Garrett. She said confirmed cases of COVID-19 have fallen across most of the U.S. Very good news. But it's not due to vaccines. Less than a third of Americans are fully vaccinated. I'll get to that number in just a second. The downturn of cases is thanks to masks and distancing. Common sense rocks. No, that's wrong. She talks about how a third of Americans have fully vaccinated. That means 2 doses. But a single dose of the vaccine is 80% effective. Now, I want to talk about this 80% number. This is super important. If a vaccine is 80% effective, it does not mean that you have a 20% chance of getting COVID. Let me say it again. If a vaccine is 80% effective, which 1 dose is, it does not mean that you have a 20% chance of getting COVID. What it means is you now have a 80% lower chance of getting COVID compared to someone who wasn't vaccinated. But if your chance of getting COVID was already very, 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 very small, and you lower that by 80%, that's a massive decrease. A double dose of vaccine is 95% effective. Again, that does not mean that you have a 5% chance of getting COVID. CNN made this horrific mistake a couple days ago. They said if a million vaccinated people fly on an airplane with a vaccine that's 90% effective, that means 100,000 people are going to get COVID. That is absolutely not true. It's not true if a million people, unvaccinated people flew, that 100,000 would get COVID. So it's certainly not true if a million vaccinated people flew. And they had to come back a couple days later and correct that because that's so horrifically wrong. If a vaccine has here's the math. If a vaccine has a 95% effective rate, again, it lowers your chance of getting COVID by 95%, which means that you have a 0.04% chance of getting COVID, okay? So if you get a double dose of vaccine, you have a 0.04% chance of getting COVID. 95% effective and even 80% effective is amazing and miraculous. Little comparison's sake, which the media never gives you any comparison's sake. The MMR vaccine that everyone gets, it's the measles, mumps, and rubella. It's 88% effective against mumps. 88%. And it's great, right? The flu vaccine that people want you to get all the time every year, that's between 40 and 60% effective. And we still do that. If you get a flu vaccine that's 60% effective, it doesn't mean you have a 40% chance of getting the flu. That's not how that works. So even 1 dose and your chance of getting COVID, or the effectiveness of an 80%, your chance of getting COVID drop 80% from what they already were, which was very small. That is a huge decrease. And right now, 80% of people over the age of 65 have a single dose. 80% of people over the age of 65 have a single dose. 40% of all Americans. So yes, it is absolutely the decrease in of cases, the decrease in hospitalizations, and the decrease in ICU, and the decrease in deaths is largely, if not entirely, due to the vaccines. Okay, so just let's all catch up here. This is super important. So again, on the one hand, you have the CDC and celebrities and people on the left and politicians saying, you gotta get vaccinated. How dare you not get vaccinated? You conservatives are so awful, you gotta get vaccinated. And then on the other hand, you got the former CDC director being like, oh, the mask is just as good. You have these progressives being like, oh, it's really about the masks. It's really about the distancing. What gives? Check this out. This is the Prime Minister of England.
But it is very, very important for everybody to understand that the reduction in these numbers, in hospitalizations and in deaths and in infections, has not been achieved by the vaccination program. People don't, I think, appreciate that it's the lockdown that has been overwhelmingly important in delivering this improvement in the pandemic and in the figures that we're seeing.
That's amazing. What's wrong with these people? What's wrong with these leaders? It's very simple. Why are they championing the masks and the lockdowns over the vaccines? Because they did the lockdowns. Someone else who did the vaccine, right? They did the lockdown, and they want the credit for being your savior for what they did to help you and save you, right? It was just 2 people in Germany who did the mRNA vaccine. It was Big Pharma who made it possible. Can't give Big Pharma any credit. And Saints Alive, it was Donald J. Trump and Operation Warp Speed that are to be credited for making this vaccine happen in record time. We're certainly not going to give any credit to him. So at the same time, they demand that you get it because they want to control you, right? I'm certain, I live in California, I'm certain they're going to force kids to get the vaccine in order to go back to school. They already require you to get every other vaccine. They're going to force this as well, and that's going to result in some very difficult decisions that my family is going to have to make about whether or not my kid goes to school in California, because I'm sure as heck not giving them this vaccine, not my kids. So they force you to get it. And then also, it's not a big deal. Still wear a mask. Still don't go anywhere. Still distance. Still lockdown. Get that mask back on your kid at summer camp. And they're doing that because they never want the masks or lockdowns to stop. And that's the power. It's the control and it's the power. The control is they want you to get the vaccines. The power is they never want the lockdowns or masks to stop, which is why they have to hold these two completely contradictory opinions at the exact same time. The control, how inhumane is it? Truly inhumane to force people to wear a piece of cloth over their face everywhere they go for the rest of their lives. And again, how monstrous to force that onto children. That is power and control over you. It is clearly the vaccines that are causing cases and deaths to drop. But they can't, the left, the progressives, they can't give vaccines credit. Because because if the vaccines work, then you don't need to wear masks anymore. And they want to force you to wear the masks forever. That's the control. And they're never going to give credit to anyone else because they need to be your savior. You think the politicians are going to come out and say, oh, thank you, Big Pharma. Thank you, startup medical company in Germany for coming up with the mRNA. You think they're going to give credit to anyone else? Of course not. It's got to be them. They saved the day. They saved you. They rescued you. Their depth of never being able to admit mistakes is so deep that they will dismiss this miraculous vaccine's effectiveness in order to make sure that they always remain your savior. All the fear, all the doomsday predictions, all the modeling, all of that turned out to be wrong. And we're still going to listen to the CDC's guidance when it comes to kids at summer camp? Give me a break. Thomas Sowell has such a great line, as always. He says, the most fundamental fact about the ideas of the political left is that they do not work. Therefore, we should not be surprised to find the left concentrated in institutions where ideas do not have to work in order to survive, hence the CDC. Darwinian adaptation to environment applies not only to nature but also to society. Just as you don't find eagles living in the ocean or fish living on mountaintops, so you don't find leftists concentrated where their ideas have to stand the test of performance. So good. And specifically about masks after being vaccinated. Thomas Sowell also said, no one can really understand the political left without understanding that they are about making themselves feel superior. Masks and lockdowns today, it's something you support if you feel that you are morally superior to everyone else. Coming up next, got another example of just this radical difference between people's perceptions of a thing and the reality of the thing. We got that coming up, and Zuby coming up at the end of the show as well. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. It is amazing how far off people's perceptions are from reality. You watch it and it's like, sometimes it feels like we're living in the Twilight Zone. You're like, what's going on? Like how, we can watch the same thing and people come to completely different interpretations of what we're all watching. It is so bizarre, but it's super important that we align our perceptions with reality, even though no one's doing it, which is why we have a fancy schmancy news segment called Perception versus Reality. Oh, look at that. That was great. Short and sweet, right? Boom, right to the point. Read a great post from Mark Manson, who I enjoy very much. It was about why everything on the internet's wrong. And you should know that everything that's on the news comes from the internet. Twitter runs the world right now. I want everyone to know how influential Twitter is in the world, because whatever's trending on Twitter is what news producers pick up and talk about on the news. So then you ask, okay, well, who decides what's trending on Twitter? Who figures that out? Because whoever figures out what's trending influences the producers, which is then what people talk about and what you are subjected to listening to. Well, who decides what's trending on Twitter? It's a combination of losers who have no idea what they're talking about in their mother's basement, or a bunch of activists in Silicon Valley. Either way, these are not people that we want to be setting the discourse of this country. I got 2 reasons here why everything you read on the internet is wrong. First, it's called absence of evidence is evidence of absence. It goes something like this. Let's say I write a post, right? And I write this post about how much I love oranges. I love oranges. They're great. They taste delicious. Kind of make a little post about it. Boom, send. What's the first thing someone comes back with? Oh, so you hate bananas. Wow, such a racist over here, hates bananas. You're like, whoa, all right. Just because I like oranges doesn't mean I don't like bananas. And that's how the internet works. Now, in a normal face-to-face conversation with another human being, the conversation would go something like this. Hey, Charlie, let me tell you something. I love oranges. They taste great. And Charlie would be like, man, oranges are great. You know what's great too? Bananas. Bananas are awesome. Man, you're right. I love bananas too. Oranges and bananas are awesome. That's how that conversation would go in real life. Instead, because it's over the internet, we get these massive outrages over the dumbest things ever. And then the ladies on The View talk about it, and then it's trending on Twitter again, and it's all this big circle jerk, right? This is why almost all the things that are outrages would be solved in a one-on-one conversation in about 0.3 seconds, and that would be the end of it. Okay. Second reason why everything on the internet is wrong. It's nuance. Right? So Mark Manson told a story where he made a post about how COVID is almost over. Okay? And he got all these people freaked out because no one could agree on what the definition of almost is. What do you mean by almost? Do you mean 3 months? 3 weeks? 3 o'clock? What do you mean by almost? So everyone who thought that he meant 3 days freaked out because they thought it would be months until COVID's over. How dare you think that it's going to be done in 3 days? And the people who thought he meant 3 months, they freaked out because they thought he meant 3 days, right? And so everyone's freaking out for no reason. And again, if it were a one-on-one conversation, then he would be like, hey, COVID's almost over. And the person would be like, oh, what do you mean by almost? He'd be like, oh, I mean like 3 weeks it'll be over. Oh, yeah, okay, great. Like that, and that would be the end of that conversation. But it's not, because we don't talk like human beings anymore in person. Everything's done over the internet. And it doesn't work. So how long has social media been around? 15 years? 10, 15 years, something like that? So we've had 10 or 15 years of absolutely crippling our ability to communicate as human beings. Right? Then you throw COVID on top of that, where we're not even face-to-face. And even if on the off chance you are face-to-face, you got your mask covering your face like this, you can't even talk like this anyway. All that combined, we're inept. We're absolutely inept when it comes to talking to each other. Okay? So that's the first thing. Part 2 is our perceptions are so far from reality. And we've done a bunch of these lately, which is why we have a new fancy, sweep graphic that we just played there. So 2 that we've covered recently. 44% of liberals think that police kill over 1,000 unarmed black men every single year. That's 3 a day. Over 1,000. And the answer is 13. Some years it's like 20 or so, right? That is so far away from 1,000 or over 1,000, right? Half of liberals think it's over 1,000 unarmed black men, okay? How can people's perception be so far off? And we can't have a conversation, right? If you think police kill 4,000 unarmed black men every year, and the truth is 13, we can't have a conversation on what to do with police reform, right? We're living on totally different planets. That's the first one. Second one, Bill Maher highlighted the point last week that liberals were asked, or everyone was asked, if you get COVID, what are the chances that you get hospitalized? So if you get COVID, what are the chances that you're going to be hospitalized? 41% of liberals said it's over a 50% chance. So you have 50-50 chance. You get COVID, 50% of the time you're going to the hospital. It's 41% of liberals said that. 28% of liberals said it's over 20% chance. So that's 69% of liberals think that you have over a 20% chance of going to the hospital when you get COVID. It's about 1 to 5%. 1 to 5%. And then with the vaccine, it's you have a 0% chance of going to the hospital. So again, someone's perception is not even close. So if we're gonna have a conversation about, risk assessment and should kids or should you be allowed to go outside without a mask, we can't have that conversation because you're over here thinking that if you get COVID, there's a 50% chance you're gonna go to the hospital. When the reality is, if you're 30 years old and healthy and you get COVID, there's like a no percent chance that you're gonna go to the hospital. So now we're gonna talk about masks. We're not even on the same planet about what's going on here. Okay, we've talked about those recently. I got another one for you. Progressives, for the longest time, have convinced everyone that we have an over-incarceration problem in America. They say there's too many people in prison. Now, they're right, just not in the right way, right? I agree there's too many people in prison in the sense that I wish there weren't so many people breaking the law, and I wish we lived in a society where so many people didn't break the law and therefore need to be in prison. Like, I mourn at the fact that there's that many people breaking laws that go to prison, right? But if anything, we need more people in prison. We need more prisons. Do you ever hear anyone talk about the need to build more prisons? No, we're doing the opposite. We're emptying prisons. We're closing down prisons. A couple years ago, the state Supreme Court in California said that the prisons in California are so overcrowded that it's cruel and unusual punishment. So what did we do? We let a bunch of people out of prison. Not for 1 second, this was like 5 years ago maybe, not for 1 second did anyone in California say, well, should we build more prisons? That way they won't be overcrowded anymore? No, that never crossed anyone's mind. It was like, oh, well, bummer, we're just gonna have to let half the people out of prison. And then crime goes up and everyone's scratching their heads wondering why. Okay, so that's the first thing, that it's way too many people in prison. Why are there so many people in prison, say the left? Well, non-violent drug offenses. That's what you hear all the time. Here is the former president saying the same.
But here's the thing. Over the last few decades, we've also locked up more and more nonviolent drug offenders than ever before for longer than ever before.
That may be true, that we're locking up more nonviolent drug offenders than ever and for longer. That may be true, but people have no idea what the reality is of how many people that is, because it's almost none. So here's the true story. State prisons make up 87% of the nation's prison population. Okay, so almost everyone in prison's in a state prison. Drug offenses were only 16% of those prisoners. Violent felons are 54%. Okay, so the vast majority is violent offenders. Now you're saying, well, Slater, that's 54%. I wouldn't say that's the vast majority. No. Even of those 16% of people who are in state prison because of drug offenses, most of those were plea deals. So they actually did way worse things, but they pleaded down to more simple drug charges. Very few people are in prison for possession of drugs, and no one's in prison for having a joint. So we could talk more about that issue specifically, but the reason I bring it up is just another example of incorrect perceptions, right? Oh, too many people in prison, and they're in prison for nonviolent drug offenses. No, it's not true. If anything, there needs to be more people in prison because a vast majority are in there for violent felonies, and there's 20,000 murders in the country every year, and 8,000 of them go unsolved. How about that for a fact that no one talks about? 20,000 murders in this country every year, 8,000 of them go unsolved. So I can think of 8,000 people a year that should be in prison that aren't. So there should be way more people in prison, quite frankly. You, watching right now, you have an incredibly important job to get people to see the truth. And when you do, when you share these facts that I just shared with you here, people will reject it. People will reject it in every single way that they can think of. But don't stop helping them see reality. It's hard enough to fix this country anyway, but right? And it's hard enough to fix the country. It's hard enough to fix the country when things are going well, right? It's hard enough to fix the country if we just can't communicate because of the internet, right? When we can't see each other, when we got masks covering our faces. But on top of all of that, it's almost impossible to fix this country when people's perceptions are on completely different planets from reality. So that's where you come in. And that's why we have this neat little sweeping graphic again. There you go. Very good. Coming up, we got Zuby. Love Zuby. But in the next segment, we got a major labor bill, actually a couple of them, coming across the country, which is wonderful news because there's a Democrat version in the federal government. So we got to fight against that. Good old federalism. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, this segment is for you if you are an independent contractor, if you've hired an independent contractor, if you've ever benefited from an independent contractor, which is literally everyone in this country if you've ever ridden an Uber before. I want to cover this PRO Act here. So here on the first, we like to cover these bills that no one else is talking about. Everyone's trying to distract you with all these stupid stories, and they don't cover the legislation that will make a dramatic, in this case, detriment to your life. So that's why I want to cover the PRO Act, as we've done for a lot here on this show. So here in California, a couple years ago, we passed this bill, AB 5, and it was horrific for independent contractors. But first of all, the well-connected were able to exempt a lot of different professions out of AB 5 in California. But have no fear, it's now going nationwide with the PRO Act. Vincent excuse me, I butchered the name. Let me try again. Vincent, how do you pronounce your last name? Vincent Vernuccio. Vernuccio, you got it. There we go. Apologize, Mr. Vernuccio. From the Mackinac Center for Public Policy is here to talk about what different states are doing to combat the PRO Act. Give us, how are you, sir? Thanks for being here. Give us the quick 60-second on what the PRO Act is.
Well, the PRO Act is a smorgasbord of bad ideas in order to make unionization a lot easier for unions, but also force employees and force workers and even force entrepreneurs to join and pay unions. The worst part of the PRO Act is that it would allow unions to get private sector workers fired for not paying them. 27 states right now say that you don't have to pay a union to keep your job. The PRO Act would kill that. Stop right to work for the private sector. And then, as you were talking about, would also make it that entrepreneurs, independent workers, small business owners, people working for themselves would be employees so unions can more easily organize them.
Amazing. If for no other reason, you don't even need to know anything about the bill. Everyone should be against it just for the federalism implications of it. The fact that the federal government can come in and get rid of all these state laws that's a reason enough to be against it. Give me like 2 examples of someone watching now who would be affected by the PRO Act if it passes.
Well, the easy examples are Uber drivers, gig economy workers, independent contractors, but it goes so much further than that. Besides those independent workers, freelance writers, contractors, small business owners, it would also affect people that own franchise businesses. So if you're a franchise business owner, you actually own your own business. The PRO Act would essentially make it that you're an employee for a large distant corporation simply because unions want to make it easier to organize you. So you're talking about Dunkin' Donuts franchisees, you're talking about McDonald's franchisees, and the list goes on and on. It's taking people that are working for themselves, making good money, turning them into employees, probably making less, all so they can be organized.
Wow. Okay. So let's say you own a franchise, or would it be you own a franchise, or even if you worked at a franchise, you would have to join a union, or what would that look like?
Well, what you have is entrepreneurs that buy into franchise. So that McDonald's on the corner, that's not owned by McDonald's corporate. That's actually owned by a small mom and pop shop company that owns that individual McDonald's, and they are a franchise of McDonald's corporate. So, they set a lot of the employment terms, but they buy their, burgers and materials from McDonald's and are able to use McDonald's branding. But that local entrepreneur actually owns that McDonald's. And what the PRO Act would do is say that, oh, well, you're actually a joint employer with McDonald's corporate. And then what happens, because McDonald's corporate has all this extra liability, they're going to say, yeah, you don't have those freedoms, you small business owner. And they're going to come in, and that owner is now going to become a manager, probably get a huge slash in pay, simply because it's easier to organize McDonald's corporate, go one-stop shop to the corporate guys, then come in and organize small business to small business to small business.
Wow. And the unions get more dues and more power, which is all they want. That's amazing. Good for them for coming up with this scheme, though. So what did Indiana do to stop this?
Okay. Well, here's the silver lining here. Even though the PRO Act looks to repeal right to work for private sector employees, there's nothing that Congress can do to repeal these freedoms for public employees. There was a 2018 Supreme Court case, Janus versus AFSCME, that said that everything that government unions do is political, and because it's political, public employees have a First Amendment right to pay. Essentially, it brought right to work to public employees across the country. What Indiana did is it simply said that, hey, for teachers, if you have these rights, we're going to inform you of those rights before you start paying union dues. And that we have to make sure you actually want to pay union dues. So the teacher, the school employee would actually opt in directly to the school, instead of the school simply taking the union's word for it. Hey, take money out of my pay, take money out of this teacher's paycheck and give it to us. And it would inform them that, hey, by the way, you don't have to pay. So this was just signed by Governor Holcomb. And it's actually a huge step forward in protecting the First Amendment rights of public employees. And, Senator Boots and Representative Goodrich, who sponsored the bill, deserve a lot of applause out there in the Hoosier state.
Nice. Let's get some more red states to do good things like this. Beautiful. Vincent Vernuccio from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy out of Michigan. Vincent, appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man. Let's pay more attention. We'll keep focusing on this PRO Act to make sure this doesn't happen because it's just a union power grab, right? And again, good for them for coming up with it and calling it something fancy. It was like the PRO Act. Oh, who's against the PRO Act? Well, every single American should be against it. Coming up next, we'll talk with the wonderful Zuby about free speech, political correctness, all the madness happening in our country today. Coming up next, True Story. Mike Slater, spread the word.
Zuby got deplatformed. He got kicked off of Twitter. This is crazy. Zuby is a musician. He's a rapper from the UK who's been on the podcast before. I mean, the dude doesn't even swear. And someone said, I bet I sleep with more women than you do, to which he writes, okay, dude. And they decided by him saying, okay, dude, okay, that is grounds for being banned from Twitter temporarily.
Oh, you don't like my style?
Okay, dude.
Oh, you don't like my lyrics?
Okay, dude.
Oh, you don't like my politics?
Okay, dude.
Do you even know what knowledge is?
There's Zuby. He's got his new album, Word of Zuby, coming up next. British rapper doesn't do justice for your introduction, Zuby. How should one introduce you properly?
Wow. independent rapper, author, podcast host, and creative entrepreneur. I think that covers all bases.
And female weightlifting champion. I first came across Zuby a couple years ago when he broke the world record. So tell us the whole full story. We have the video as well. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so that was over 2 years ago. So 26th of February, 2019. I just posted a tweet. At the time, I had about 18,000 followers, and I said that I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as woman while lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. So I just put that out there thinking that, it would get a couple laughs, maybe a couple hundred likes. Next thing I know, it's taking over the internet. Dozens of millions of people watched it, started getting coverage in the UK, USA, all over. This thing just blew up like crazy. And it was the catalyst for a lot of people to discovering who I am. And then a lot of people obviously stuck around, and my audience continued to grow because I have more to offer to the world than a fantastic deadlift.
And I'm grateful you did. Let's talk about COVID for a second.
Okay.
You made a great tweet the other day. You said these people literally told you that you can't see your friends, hug your family, run your business, or go outside, and most people just said okay. In fact, many wanted to be dominated harder. I had no idea how easily a population could be enslaved. Violence wasn't even necessary. So as you look back on this last year and a half, and are you in England?
I'm in the UK, yeah.
Yeah, so England was even harder locked down than where I am in California.
I was going to say it's been illegal to leave for a while, but yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So what do you make of human nature of this last year?
Wow. I'll be honest, man. I understand the 20th century completely now. And that might sound like a little bit of a dark thing to say, but I think a lot of us look back on history and we wonder how certain things happened and how they went on for so long and how people were able to do certain things, whether you're talking about the rise of totalitarian regimes in Germany, in the Soviet Union, in China, in Vietnam. If you're going back further, if you're looking at, things like slavery and just all this crazy stuff that's happened in history, and we look back on it as modern humans and we think, how did that happen, right? That couldn't happen again. That doesn't make sense, etc. And the truth is that human nature is human nature, both on an individual level, but especially on a collective level. And one thing I've really seen over the past year is what happens when people are afraid, right? The power of the fear response. I've always known, I've said for a long time that fear is the most powerful human emotion. But we've just seen that on a whole different level. And when people are afraid, they're willing to totally throw their principles out the window, and they won't just accept authoritarianism, but a large percentage of people will in fact demand it, right? They will demand authoritarianism. And people want to be controlled. People want to be taken care of. People don't want to go against the grain. Very few people are willing to go against the herd, put their head above the parapet. I think we've known this for, with a lot of stuff that's been going on in the past several years, but it really came to a head over these past 14, 15 months. And it's been, it's certainly been eye-opening. It's been quite disappointing, but it's been a learning experience.
Let's talk about the going against the grain and the fear that people have of doing that. First of all, why do you not? And what is it that people are afraid of?
It's a great question. Firstly, I think the biggest fear that human beings have is fear of judgment / ostracization. As far as I'm aware, glossophobia, which is the fear of public speaking, more people are afraid of that than are afraid of death. I believe it's the most common fear or phobia, merely speaking in public. And it's not the speaking that people are afraid of, it's the judgment of others. It's standing out, being stared at, having people think you're wrong or you're stupid or you're incompetent or whatever it is. So it's naturally ingrained in people to be very, very afraid of not going with the herd. I often say that human beings are herd animals who believe we're individualistic, but actually it's a small minority of people who are truly individualistic and critical thinking, willing to go against the grain, stand in a room of 100 people who all have an opinion and say, no, actually, I think all 100 of you are wrong, and I think I'm the one who's right. Very few people are willing to do that. You can look into the Ash experiment if you want to see how deep that runs. And then why am I like this? I think part of it is just how I'm naturally wired. I have quite a unique personality type. And I think I'm just wired in a way that I don't mind standing out in that way and rocking the boat and just being independent and thinking for myself. And then also, maybe this is part of it, but also for me, it's I can't not be like that, right? Like I feel a moral and an ethical compulsion to speak out, right? I can't just sit back and shut up. If I see that something is out of line or it's wrong or I have a strong opinion that nobody else is expressing, but which I want to say, I'm going to say it. It's harder for me not to, and I can't look at myself in the mirror and love myself and be happy about who I am if I feel like I'm being a coward. I despise cowardice. So it doesn't mean you have to jump into every single battle and be argumentative all the time and be, be contrarian for no reason whatsoever. But if it's something I feel strongly about or something that I just think is wrong, then it's my duty. It's my moral and ethical duty to say something. And again, looking back at history, so many bad things happened and continued for such a long time because most people weren't willing to do that, right? People are seeing, okay, there's something, stuff here is bad or stuff is going sideways, but I don't want to be the person who says it because there could be some consequences for that.
You may be wired like that, and I would argue that everyone else needs to actively rewire themselves to have a little more of that. I love the cowardice point. You're exactly right. I want to keep talking about COVID. Let me ask you one more COVID question.
Sure.
It'd be interesting one day, and maybe if we had more time, we could sit down and do it. And I'm not sure what your perspective of America has been being over in England, but it'd be interesting for someone to do an analysis of how COVID, like the reactions of people and leaders with COVID in America and England, right? Because it's different. It's different. Like America, British people and Americans are different. Maybe we'll start there. How have you noticed that British people and Americans are different? Our neighbors are British, so we've had this conversation quite a bit. And my brother lives in England too.
Gotcha.
And I asked that because in America, there's been a lot of this weaponizing of compassion, I think, right? It's like, oh, you don't care about people. You don't care about grandma. Like, I do this for others. You don't?
Yes.
Why are you, right? I wonder if that's been the case in England or if they've had a different twist on that. So that's a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that aspect of it, I think, has certainly been in the UK. The whole, you want to kill grandma if you don't wear a mask or you don't support lockdowns. There's been a lot of emotional blackmail, a lot of bullying and shaming and social coercion. And again, that's extremely effective on most people, but on me, it slides off. It's annoying, right? I don't like being called. Nobody likes being called names, but I'm of the opinion that, okay, if someone calls me something that I am, then I just own and I accept it. If someone calls me something that I'm not, then I know I'm not that thing. I know who I am. I know what's in my heart. So I don't really care that they call me it in most cases. And I always like to imagine that the vast majority of people are operating from a place of what they think is right. It doesn't mean that everyone is always right, but I try to always bear in mind, especially when I have disagreements with people or I'm debating or I'm arguing, I always try to remember that most people have good intentions. Not everybody does, right? There are malcontent. There are people who are vindictive and who have malice and who are malicious, but the majority of people are operating off of what they think is correct, and some of it is quite philosophical, right? Some of it comes down to even simple things like, how much do you trust the government? Right? If you are very, very trusting of the government and you believe that they are doing what is best for you and for everybody or what they perceive to be, and you have a high trust in the government, then your response to a lot of these things, especially when it comes to mandates or laws or restrictions, your view on that is going to be very, very different to someone who's more skeptical of the government and who doesn't think that, okay, this is all just about protecting me from a virus and stopping me from getting sick. I think there's something else going on here. There's something sinister. There's a lot of questions, right? Someone who's more in that latter category, you're going to end up in very different places. And then if those two people talk about some of these policies, et cetera, it's going to be very hard for them to understand each other, let alone on a medium like Twitter or something. It's virtually impossible. But even in the real world, it's two very, very different approaches. And some people are much more freedom oriented. I'm very much in that latter category. And some people are a lot more safety and security oriented, even if it's an illusion, even if it's not true safety and security. They want to feel like it's safety and security. And they want to be told what to do.
Excuse me, we did something the other day about the psychological assurances of safety. Like I'm gonna put these plexiglass barriers around kids, even though we know it doesn't do anything and it may make things worse, but it's the psychological assurance of safety. Like, gosh, that's so screwed up to me. Zuby, I don't want to cut you off here. We only got about 90 seconds, but I want to ask you this because you have an ebook out called Strong Advice, and it's about being healthy and all. And 78% of people who are hospitalized or died of COVID were obese. So this is the big third rail in America. You can't talk about obesity, but it seems to be that COVID's an obesity disease. So you had 60 seconds. What do we do to break that third rail?
Honestly, people just need to talk. Everybody needs to stop lying. People just need to be more honest. There's a line between, political correctness is deadly because it stops us from talking about these things which have a real world impact on people's lives. And so it's totally good to be polite and to be kind to people, but we shouldn't sugarcoat the truth and we absolutely should not lie. So I think people need to be open and willing to have those conversations, not in a way that's demonizing anybody, but in a way that's just being honest and open. And if we want to find solutions, we have to be able to talk about the problem.
Where can we learn more about Zuby?
ZubyMusic.com. You can follow me on all social media platforms at Zuby Music. If you want to check out my music or podcast, just search Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, on your favorite platform. I'm very easy to find.
Zuby, let's do it again, man. Appreciate everything you're doing.
Nice one, man. Thank you.
Thanks, brother. Keep up the good work. Zuby, Z-U-B-Y, music on everything. All right, Slater Crusaders, have a fantastic day. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.